So, welcome to Zero to CCNA Automation. This course basically is created as a completely hands-on course. So, of course, as we know that CCNA exams always have theoretical questions and also have some simulations or labs. But what we wanted to create is to get you all the insights of the detailed information about what exactly you need to know about the theory part, like what is API, what exactly do we mean by northbound API, southbound APIs, application programming interface, basically? What do we mean by different data formats versus data structure versus data languages like Yang data models? And how do we use different automation tools like Ansible or version control using Git or using virtualization versus containers? Containers basically is using Dockers and creating like a self-contained environment for an application. How exactly do we implement that? Or using Python. So we wanted to create a very hands-on heavy implementation of Zero to CCNA. Technically, if you are going for CCNA level of automation, you don't need much exposure to the practical part. There are only few things here and there you need to know. Mostly it is theory and understanding the logic. But we wanted to create something like, CCNA automation plus, where you get more hands-on than you would actually need in the exam. But it's actually fun and it's a great starting point if you want to go further into automation, because you will see many things and maybe you would like one thing over the other and you want to explore that particular part more, which can be covered later in CCNP automation or some specific automation courses like Docker implementation going in depth or Python in depth. And then these kind of branches can be used later. But this is a great starting point, and we want to make sure that we understand the logic and then we follow it with the configuration practicals so that you can actually see in action how exactly the things are working. So that was the objective, to create this course. And let's talk about the structure of the course. So this is going to be once a week, like one session every week. We will have on Thursday evenings, like this one, 10 p.m. Eastern time. And the course time will be 2 hours per session. But as I always say in my classes, this is a topic driven class, not the time driven class. So it depends how much time it will take to cover the topic of the day. It may be more or less than 2 hours in that, right? Now, one thing that generally many courses also miss when they are talking about automation is, of course, automation people like to get their hands dirty as soon as possible. Let me get to that router, or let me get to that Postman application, or let me try to create some Ansible scripts to push to the devices. But before you go there, we need to have in-depth theory. We need to understand the logic behind programmability and also automation. Like what exactly is programmability, what exactly is automation, how they are different, and how they are connected. Why generally people always use these two words together, programmability and automation. Are they exactly same thing or do they mean different things? So we are going to understand the theory part as well. And then of course, in every course, we always follow the same specific structure, which is when we start a new technology, we answer these three questions. What is the technology we are talking about? Why do we need it? And then, of course, how to configure it. That's the hands-on part. So don't get me wrong. This is going to be a very hands-on heavy course. We will do a lots of labs, but it's not that we are going to start with the labs immediately. We will have to understand the logic first before we get to the configuration part of the labs, right? So anything we are talking about, we will always understand first. For example, maybe you already have some experience with Ansible, or maybe you already know how to use Git. But I'm going to assume that you have absolutely no knowledge of it, and then I'm going to start from the scratch. So if I'm talking today about Yang data models, I'm going to tell you what exactly is Yang data models, why do we need it, like what exact problem is it solving in the automation world, and then of course how do we utilize it. So when you go with this structure, even if you have already some knowledge of these technologies or some of these technologies, it will be a good way to bridge the gaps in your conceptual plane. And also, if you have absolutely no knowledge of a particular thing, that's perfect, because we are starting it from the scratch. So we will make sure that you understand everything in a structured way, right? So every week we are going to start with the theory and we'll follow it with the practical lab. And after the session is finished, I'm going to send you the labs PDF, right? So that you will have exactly the same lab that I showed you into the live session, because we are not trying to test you immediately after the session. The idea is that you re-strengthen your logic and the concept. So whatever you learn into the live session, and then you see me doing it live in the live session also. And then when I send you the lab, you can actually try it again. And then that's the reason why we also send the lab solution file, so that you can always check the solution file in case if you get stuck or if you need some help. Or in some cases, if it's a completely GUI based solution, we don't send the solution file, but you have the recordings of the videos, so you can always go back to the recording and see the structure step by step, what needs to be done, and which step or steps did you exactly miss or did wrong if your variation is not working, right? So it's a completely, as I mentioned, full hands-on approach. And the good thing is that you don't need to invest anything extra for this particular class, because everything we will be doing it on EVNG based topologies. So I already created an EVNG based virtualization lab, and it's an OVA file which you just need to import into VMware, and you will already have the devices that you need. They are copied into the backend Ubuntu Linux server. They are already licensed, and the topologies are pre-built so that you can start working immediately just after importing the. So I see a question from Gary that what Cisco book we should buy for this class and read. So if you really want to, because many people have different ways, right? Some people learn better by watching recordings or videos. Some people by doing practice, and some people also prefer books, right? Myself included. So I will explain you later that this CCNA automation used to be called the DevNet course before. So even if you can get hands-on on the Cisco Press book, which is for the CCN automation, or the Cisco DevNet Associate, that used to be the name before. So if you even get a book for that, because the practical part, we will make sure we cover everything, right? But if you want a little bit more theory, then those books can be great. Even if you buy like a couple of years older version, where it used to be called DevNet Associate, that is completely fine because it covers all the important points. Ultimately, you just want to get more details of the logic. So that thing hasn't changed. It's just a rebranding of the DevNet Associate certification as CCNA automation, right? So I would suggest you as a Cisco Press is always the best. If you can get that one, that will be the best solution for that, right? But also these classes, which we are going to cover every week, these are also recorded. So you will have lifetime access to the recordings. And anytime you want to refresh your memory or want to check a specific part of the lab, why it's not working or why it is done in the way this it is done, so you can always come to the recordings and watch the recordings, right? And since this is the first class we have for CCN automation, of course, the recordings will not be from one of the previous classes. It will be from this class only that you will get on the recording portal, right? So that's the structure we have for our course. Now, exactly what topics are we going to cover in CCNA automation? Now, if you go and check the CCNA automation blueprint on Cisco website, you will see that there are a few major topics that needs to be covered, starting with network fundamentals. So this one actually they expect you to know the networking basics already. Like of course we are going to cover some idea like what is a MAC address, what is IP address in subnetting, some basic idea of switching and routing. But mostly this session will be concentrated on the troubleshooting part. So we will see some services are configured, how do we find the issues and how do we fix it. So generally, if you're coming for CCN automation, you should already have some basic networking knowledge, and then we are just going to brush it up a little bit. We are just going to revision a few things, and then we'll get to the practical part. So the topology that we will use for this one, let me show you the OVA quickly. So you'll see that when I send you the OVA, you will see two topologies here, automation topology and the network troubleshooting. So network troubleshooting is the one that we'll use in the first week when we discuss about network fundamentals. So in this one, we'll configure some services. In this simple network, you can see one switch, two routers. where one is the ISP router, and then you have some web server on the internet, and then we will be accessing that web server from the host machines, from the computers, and then there will be some issues that can be introduced, and then we'll see how exactly we can troubleshoot these issues. So it's more of a troubleshooting lab as far as the subnetting or networking is concerned. But yeah, it will be a interesting part because we will go through some of the core information about networking that is very important for understanding the network, setting up the network, and also troubleshooting the network, right? So all these three things can be covered with this structure. And then you will see that there are other topics which are basically, of course, all automation. So we'll start with the software development and design. We'll understand the application programming interface, what exactly API means. Again, what is this? Why do we need this? And how exactly we can practice this, right? How we can use APIs with the Cisco devices. So you can use APIs with any platform which actually supports the incoming calls, and we can use either CLI, or we can use the Postman application as the GUI, or we can use some in-house tools depending on which application you're using. But you can use APIs with any vendor. But Cisco devices, of course, you can use it more specifically because we will see how we can use it in normal Cisco routers. Well, you cannot actually use APIs with all Cisco routers. You need to have iOS XE version. So normal iOS routers are not going to respond to any Yang data model queries. So we'll actually have to have the Cisco devices. And that's why you see that the second topology that we have for the automation, we actually have a CSR router, which is actually an iOS XE router, which can actually respond to the application programming interface queries. And we are going to use two Linux machines, Automation Host 1 and Automation Host 2. These machines will be used to either initiate the API calls or create Python scripts, create Ansible playbooks to initiate or update any configuration on the devices. And then these can also be used because you can see we are connected to internet also. So we will also use these automation hosts to query something on the sandbox devices. So Cisco has sandbox websites where there are servers or applications created. You can actually query them to see how exactly the response comes back. So we are going to use these Linux automation host to get that done as well. So a little bit of basic Linux knowledge is also needed for this. We can quickly go through it in one of the sessions so that you know at least the important commands. And I'll send you a PDF with all the useful Linux commands to start with, especially for the automation part. What commands are you going to need to get started, right? So we are going to use that. And then, of course, we have this router too. This is a normal iOS router, not the iOS XE router. But the reason I'm using it here as well is because so that we can configure some kind of routing between them. And then when we query different things from the CSR router using API calls, we can get some variation into the output. More interfaces, more IP addresses, more information can be received into our queries, API calls that we have made, right? One thing I want to make sure that you understand is that if you are using VMware, and if you were our student before for CCNA class or Linux class or AWS class, you will see that if you don't have the Intel VTX support, means if the virtualization is not supported, that is even okay because we use all the normal routers in CCNA classes, right? But if you're using CSR router, iOS XE router, it's actually not a normal IOL image. It is actually a KEMU image. It's a emulation image, and this one actually needs nested virtualization. Without that, your topology will not boot. Your CSR router will not boot. So even if I send you the OVA and you import into the VMware, so when you go to the VMware, let's say this is the, let me just clean it up a little bit. Yeah. So let's say this is the OVA that we have. And if you go to the properties of this one, go to the settings. If you go to the processors, you see that the virtualized Intel VT-X EPT or AMD-V RVI is checked. You need to make sure that you check this box and it has to work. So in your case, if the Intel VTX, you check it here and it gives you an error, and that's why you unchecked it for CCNA class or any other previous classes. That was okay there because we were using only IOL routers. But now we are using the emulated host like CSR router. It doesn't boot or it doesn't work properly without the virtualization. So you have to check this box. And after checking this box, if you try to boot a device and it's not booting, that means your virtualization is disabled or nested virtualization is disabled in your BIOS. So you'll have to restart your desktop or your laptop. You need to make sure that you go to the BIOS by pressing F10, F12, or delete whatever you're using, which hardware. But you need to make sure you go to the BIOS. You need to go to the processor part and you have to enable virtualization, activate the virtualization there, and then try this again. And even if then if it doesn't work, then you contact me and then we have to make sure that it works before we move on with the implementation. Because as I mentioned, the CSR device is not going to work if you don't have virtualization. As a matter of fact, what happens is, just to give you a quick idea, that in our earlier classes, what we have been using was IOL, basically iOS over Linux. Now, this is actually not another virtual machine inside EVNG. It is just a service, a Linux service, just like any other services, right? So when you have VMware, in the VMware, you install the EVNG. We know that EVNG is nothing but actually the Ubuntu operating system, right? It's a Linux operating system, Linux Ubuntu operating system. So you're already virtualizing one machine, right? Now inside EVNG, when you install the IOL routers, like we use in the normal CCNA classes, then it's all is good because you are not doing nested virtualization. It is just a Linux service, just like other services you are running in Ubuntu. So that is completely fine. But when you try to use the iOS XE devices, or for example, if you go further for CCIE class, you will see that you will need SD-WAN also. You have to install SDA devices also. So you need the vManager, vMon, and vSmart, and all the VHS, CHS. So you see that all these devices, including the CSR routers that I'm talking about, that we have in our topology, these routers are actually KMO images. Now, KMO actually stands for Q emulation. So this emulation is the problem. It is an emulated host. And you know what emulation means? Emulation means that it is not the same structure as the host operating system. Now, host is actually a operating system machine like Ubuntu. It's a Linux operating system. But the iOS XE is not using the same structure. Their structure is not same. iOS XE is using the Cisco's structure. So whenever you need to virtualize this machine in the real time, the architecture will have to be converted from one type of architecture to another, and that is called emulation. Emulation means emulating another architecture on some different architecture. If the architectures were same, you actually don't need emulation. That is just simply called virtualization or nested virtualization. But here you need emulation, and for this, you need to activate the VTX, Intel VTX or AMD-V support, and that's why you need to go to the BIOS and activate this. But of course, when I send you the OVA, first import it, make sure that that Intel VTX box processor box is checked, and then try to boot it. If it boots, all good, you are already ready. If it doesn't, then make sure that you restart and activate features in the BIOS, and then try it again. Or after that, contact me if still it's not working, right? So that is very important. We are also going to understand application deployment, how exactly we use different application deployment features and implementation, infrastructure and automation, how we can use netconf and resconf API calls to the devices, and what different features or client-side software we can use to achieve this, right? And you can see that these are the 6 major branches you total have into the CCNA automation course. And if you go and check the blueprint, you will see that there is a lot of explain or define terms, and there are few implement or interpret or deploy terms where basically you might see a simulation question into the exam. But since this is a completely hands-on course, we divided these all requirements into 8 different weeks, and we actually go through different parts of it week by week. So for example, this is the complete 8 week structure we have. So we're going to start with the network fundamentals next week, where we go to the basics of networking and troubleshooting. followed by the first lab, which is the networking troubleshooting lab using the IP addressing and network address translation, right? Second week, we are going to talk about the Git and the version control. What exactly version control means, why it is important into any software development life cycle, and how valuable it becomes when you really want to go back, like you want to basically roll back to a previous configuration, previous stable configuration, or if you need to compare some configurations, this month's configuration from last month's configuration, you want to present something to your management, the percentage of the improvements you have done into the project. So these are very quantifiable metrics that you can easily find out using Git. And Git is actually extremely useful to keep the differential copies of all the changes you have made in your programs. And it is very popular in software development because mostly we are talking about scripts, and the scripts are not huge files. Mostly at the end of the day, these are text files, right? So they don't take huge space. So if I'm thinking about my photo library or my video library, that can become a big reservoir, because if I'm keeping all the copies, what I had into the month number 3 versus month number 6 versus month number 9, that can quickly become huge. But I'm talking about scripts here. Scripts are in kilobytes, right? So anytime you have any changes, you want to keep every single change information, including any comments that why did we make that change, what exactly happened with that change. So it's a really good documentation of all the versions of the software you have at different timestamp at different point, right? So we are going to understand that logic, and of course we'll do some basic basic Git labs also. And then in the week 3, we are going to introduce the APIs, application programming interfaces, and what exactly do they mean, and how do we actually use them to either query or change something on the receiving device. So one of the GUI software that we use for this is called Postman. We'll see one of the example of CLI also called curl. So the curl command, curl, is actually from the command line. So command line URL or curl. So it is called curl. But if you really want a more robust and more feature-rich solution to start making API calls to different kind of uh, environments, you use Postman for that. So Postman is a GUI software to initiate the API calls, different kind of API calls, right? But this is programmability, because you are having the programmability, or you have the capability of programming the device from a remote location. Programming can mean retrieving the information or changing the information. But if you really want to introduce automation to this programmability, then you need some programming language like Python, so that you can create the same API calls into a Python script and then initiate it by just executing the Python script. So we are going to introduce the Python language and creating some example Python scripts in the week number 4, and then of course followed by some lab. Now remember, this is on the CCNA level, so it's not going to be in depth into all of these things. It will be slightly more than you need for CCNA, but of course it's not like you are not going to learn on the expert level how to use Git or learn everything about Python. Python is a huge topic. It's a language, right? But we will go through enough things so that you become familiar and can understand or dissect a Python language script, right? So in the CCN exam, they will not ask you to create any Python language script for sure, but you should be able to create anyway some basic level of scripts of Python, and how do you actually understand the API calls that are sent using Python, right? So creating a Python script is one thing, but even if you can just understand the different parts of it when we are sending a netconf or a restconf call, then it will be a great step in for the further or advanced courses later that you might want to pursue for automation. And then, of course, we'll see how APIs can be used on the Cisco platforms. For example, how exactly we can initiate the calls to SD-WAN environment. I want to know how many VHs are there. I want to know licensing information. I can get all this information without logging into the GUI of the vManage. Just to give you an example, you can use it on any other platform as well, Meraki or Cisco Catalyst Center, which is used to be SDA. So we can actually create API calls on Cisco platforms also. And for this, we can actually use the Cisco Sandbox. Sandbox is basically always on services on Cisco websites where you can actually query different kind of applications which you don't need to implement just for checking purpose, right? Because SD-WAN is a huge implementation if you just want to make some API calls. We don't need to do it locally. We can use the SD-WAN already implemented and live on the Cisco Sandbox platform, right? So we are going to go through that structure. And then we are going to understand the Docker and the Cisco, Linux Bash born again shell. So Docker is basically a containerization concept where virtualization means you virtualize the whole operating system, right, into a separate space we call the hypervisor. And then we provide it some resources like memory, processor, storage. So the whole operating system is virtualized. That is called virtual machine. But Docker is basically creating a container where a self-sustained application and all its dependencies can be used. So generally, what happens if you use an application or create an application on one operating system, and you send just the application to someone who is using another operating system, or maybe same operating system, different version. Sometimes the application break; it doesn't work because the guest operating system doesn't have the same dependencies and environment as the host operating system. The application doesn't work, right? Docker actually allows you to create containers which where you will have the application and all its dependencies that it needs to run properly, compiled and compacted inside this container. So when you send this container, it's a self-sustained container, irrespective of the underlying architecture, guest or host operating system, they are different. It can run on any platform because you are not depending for the libraries and dependencies on the operating system. You have everything inside the container. So it's not just the application, but the application and all the dependencies of the application, like libraries. So how we can run the self-contained Docker, that is something we'll learn into week 6, and of course we'll follow it with the lab as well. Week 7 we are going to learn Ansible, which is basically the configuration management, and it's a very powerful tool we can use to actually automate things and configure things from remote location. So we are going to see some examples of that as well. And the week number 8, we are going to use the RESTconf and NetConf on the Cisco router. This like Cisco iOS XE router, we have CSR router. How do we actually connect to it? How do we configure it? How can we retrieve or change information on that device using either Postman or CLI, so CLI Postman or even Python scripts, how we can use to initiate the connection to the Cisco router, right? So these are the topics we are going to cover in our hands-on course. Now, as I mentioned that you will not need all of these for the CCNA exam, but it's actually very good starting point to learning about these things for the future advanced topics or advanced certifications. So speaking of the exam itself, what exactly CCNA automation exam is? As I was mentioning earlier, to answer Gary, it is used to be called CCNA DevNet Associate Exam. So now they actually rebranded it as CCNA Automation. So the exam code remains same. So DevNet Associate had the exam code 200-901. It's the same one, and now they're calling it CCNA Auto version 1.1. So currently the version 1.1 is active. So just like any other CCNA exam, it's a 2 hours exam, and you get multiple choice questions, drag and drop questions, tables matching, and of course you can get some simulations as well, some configuration as well. So of course we will make sure that all the hands-on that you will do will be actually more than sufficient for the simulation part of the exam. And I already mentioned you and showed you that the tools we use is EVNG on VMware, where I already created or compiled the OVA where topologies are already set. And I'll send you the OVA file after this class today only. So if I haven't sent it already, then you will get all the information how to set it up. Just need to import it in EVNG, and as I mentioned, make sure virtualization is enabled. You cannot disable it for the automation practicals. I would recommend you to give it at least 8 gig of RAM, or if your system has 8 gig, then give it at least 6 gig of RAM out of it. But the recommended would be at least 16 gig because we are using CSR routers, they are resource hungry. So, and we are also going to use the Linux host. So it's not just IOL, right, anymore. We are actually using the complete Linux operating system, Ubuntu operating system as the automation host 1 and automation host 2. So we need a bit more RAM. If you have 16 gig of RAM in your system, give at least 12 to 13 gig to the EVNG, and then it will be quite smooth and you will be able to do all the practicals very smoothly. So this is just a recommendation. And as always make sure that the network router is set to net. It is very important, especially in this class, because our automation hosts that we have, they need to connect to the internet. to update themselves or to query the Cisco sandbox websites. And for all these things, they need internet connectivity. So if your laptop is connected to the internet and you import this OVA and use the network adapter NAT, then your routers and automation host 1 and 2 will also be able to go to the internet already because I have set the configuration accordingly. So that is very important. And as I mentioned, processor, make sure Intel VTX or AMD-V is checked, right? So that's it for today. I just wanted to go through the introduction part and exactly how we are going to go about it. So this week, I'll send you the OVA. Your objective is to make sure it is working with the Intel VTX box checked or AMD-V box checked. And yeah, we'll start the network fundamental part from the next week. So that's it from my side. Thanks, guys. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Arpit. No questions from my side.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, no questions from me either.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Art. Been looking forward to this class.
Thanks, Joe. Likewise. Thanks, Ole. So thanks, guys. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.